Okay. So we're going to continue kind of our study on the disciples and look at Matthew or Levi,
Hmm.
depending on which section that you're reading, because he does go by both. Although there's a
Both.
question, why did he have two names? Now, one could have been a nickname, could have been a middle name, could have been a family name. It could have indicated that he was part of the lineage of the Levites, actually, is another suggestion I heard, which kind of sort of makes sense, actually. I mean, again, looking at maybe even a nickname, because I know that you talk to some people, they may have a shortened version of their last name as a nickname. So maybe
Yeah.
it was something like that, even. It just, we don't really know for sure. Now, we do know that he was a tax collector, and that's why I use this particular background. He was a tax collector, which, of course, meant he was, he was in essence an enemy of, as far as people were concerned, he was an enemy of the Jewish people. And of course, because
Jewish.
he was a
Hmm.
Jewish gentleman, he was in essence an enemy of the Romans, even though he worked for the Romans.
Right.
He was not well liked by pretty much anybody. Now, what was interesting was when I started reading into it, apparently what would happen as a tax collector during that time period, you would pay the taxes as a tax collector, you would pay the taxes out of your own pocket and then go and collect it from the other people.
Right.
And they had a tendency to charge a little extra. Apparently, they thought interest was a requirement that they collect. But the tendency
Yeah.
was apparently to charge a little extra
Hmm.
on
Right.
top for the interest. So they were in general, tax collectors were appointed by Roman authorities because, again, they kind of worked for them in a way. So it was, from what I understand, from what I was reading, it was almost like a bidding war
Hmm.
type of thing
Hmm.
to be a tax collector. You were seeking to have that job, which kind of makes sense in as you could, in essence, make as much money as you wanted,
Uh-huh.
because to go against the tax collector meant going against the Roman authority, and of course nobody wanted that because you could actually end up dead,
Right.
or
Right.
in for some people, even worse, in debtor's prison, because this
Hmm.
not only affected you, but it affected the rest of your family because they had to work to get you out of jail potentially, and who knows if you ever could. So of
Right.
course that was kind of an issue there. Um, Now, again, they were considered pretty much, traitors to everybody. The
Hmm.
Romans kind of
Hmm.
sort of liked them, but of course the Jewish people didn't. And of course, this is where the big scandal comes in. How dare Jesus be meeting with this person? He went and actually ate with Matthew. He ate with other tax collectors, and the Pharisees said to the other disciples, "What the heck is your teacher doing? Why is he eating with these people who are considered the enemy of the enemy?" I mean, these are the worst of the worst, because they, in their mindset, again, Romans kind of sort of didn't know any better.
Hmm.
So you didn't like them, but you kind of gave them a little bit of a buffer. Uh,
Hmm.
for a tax collector, you were a Jewish man, or, well, tax collector, you would have been Jewish man,
Right.
and you had no excuse. You were actively seeking to bring about the downfall of your own people by
Hmm.
overcharging them, overtaxing them. So, this was the worst of the worst people. And so, of course, the Pharisees gave him a lot of grief about this, gave the disciples a lot of grief, and actually, if you look at it, I mean, Matthew was seeking to not only save himself, but other tax collectors. He was giving them an opportunity too to come through and try to connect these people to Jesus. Now we don't really know if any of them responded positively. We don't know what their response really was. We just know that Jesus was there. He spoke with them. He had a meal with them, and for that time period, to have a meal with somebody was to basically say, I'm endorsing what this person is doing. I'm endorsing this person.
Right.
Specifically, when you ate with that person in their home, you are endorsing that person, which kind of makes sense. I mean, it's not dissimilar to what we would do nowadays. You are, in essence, saying, I'm okay with this person and everything about them.
So Matthew was in a way an evangelist.
I think so, in a way.
In a sense, not in a big evangelist, but he tried to witness to the rest of the tax collectors.
Yeah, and I don't know if we could. He was he was almost a gateway evangelist. So he wasn't evangelizing himself, but he was creating a gateway from the tax collectors to Jesus, or Jesus to the tax collectors. So he wasn't doing it himself, but he was a host for that evangelism situation or opportunity. So he made a chance. He opened his doors, and of course the other tax collectors would have been completely comfortable coming in and having a meal with Matthew. It was really Jesus who was the one who was kind of the standout, the unique factor in this particular meal. It would have been different. It wouldn't have been the normal side of things, because I would bet that this would have been the first meal that Matthew had ever had in which there was a religious leader. Because of course the Pharisees would have had nothing to do with them, and none of the other church leadership at the time would have wanted to have anything to do with the tax collectors at the time. And so we look at it from the perspective of, he was in a way, he was an evangelist, in that he created this opportunity, at least, for there to be some connection between these two groups. Now, what's interesting is the Pharisees make a point of talking to the disciples. And so my question is, does that mean the disciples were not in Matthew's house having the meal as well? Were they standing outside?
I wondered about that, because how did the rest of the disciples feel about Matthew?
Right.
We don't hear that.
Right. And
because he probably had collected.
Yes.
He could have. He maybe not, but he could have collected from them.
Yes.
Right.
He sure could have.
Well, it would have been no different than, say, a group of guys getting together and talking about the IRS. It would have been the exact same perspective. They wouldn't have. It was a faceless enemy, in essence, for them. They would have known who their tax collector was, but in general, they just hated all the tax collectors. And just as people nowadays, we hate the IRS. And it really, it has nothing to do with who they are or anything. It's what they represent and what they do in their job. Now, they don't do anything illegal or anything like the tax collectors during Jesus's time. But people have this automatic mentality of dislike. It's depending on the occupation that somebody has, you automatically put this stigma or this perception on this person, depending on their occupation. It's just the way people are. We've always, that's usually one of the first questions that you ask somebody when you're meeting them for the first time. What do you do? And for somebody like Matthew, who may have been trying to become more personable, that would have been the last question he wanted to answer. of course. He's not
That's
going to
right.
want to say, "Oh, I've been listening to Jesus. I've been really connecting with him and hearing what he's saying and what it's moving me." And Peter says, "Oh, well, that's great. My name's Peter. I'm a fisherman. What's your name and what do you do?" Well, he's not going to want to say that, right? I mean,
Right.
that's not something you're going to want to share. And yet, looking at the diversity of the group, you have somebody like Matthew, who would have been the higher end, um, more affluential, more educated. And then you have somebody like Peter, who would have been, I mean, he wouldn't have been a dummy, but he would have been more skilled labor rather than a more educated position like Matthew would have been. I mean, it's just two different perceptions. And of course, we have Matthew, who would have been in the bigger cities or more, again, affluential areas, at least where he lived. And then, of course, in town would be where he collected taxes. Whereas as Peter and some of the other disciples, it talks about they were from Galilee, and the fact that this was kind of the hick part of that area. And so again, we have this separation socially between these two groups, not just the fact that they were opposition, in that Matthew was, again, in essence, a traitor to his own people.
Right. You could say that I suppose that at least the ones that were fishermen of the disciples were the blue collar workers, and
Right.
Matthew, Levi was a white collar worker.
Oh, absolutely.
Completely different vocations, completely different.
Well, and something else I found very, very interesting. Let's think about this. Matthew was a tax collector, right? And so he was used to handling money. He was used to, dealing with the finances and everything. And yet he was not the one who was in charge of the purse, the money for the
That's right. I
disciple.
hadn't thought about that.
Now we don't. I don't know if we ever hear about what Judas did in particular, but again, I think what's interesting is this is kind of a reflection upon the way we run our churches nowadays. We automatically think if somebody is in finance, we need to put them on the finance team. If somebody who is again more of a blue collar, we have a tendency, well, we want them on trustees, and yet that's not really necessarily what we need to do. Now, it granted, to be on part of those teams, yes, we want people with those backgrounds and with those knowledge, those aspects that they understand, those skills, yes. But by the same token, sometimes we don't want the whole finance team to be just people who understand finance.
Right.
We don't want trustees who all, they understand, they have those skills to put things together. That's not always a good thing. Sometimes you need somebody else who has a different perspective on it, because they may have a different way of doing things that actually might be the best option, as opposed to doing something a different way. And so I think it's interesting, the way we're running churches, in that we already put labels on people simply by what?
We do.
Their occupation. We automatically design or say, okay, this is what you need to be a part of, simply because of your occupation. And instead, we should be looking at, where do you feel called to serve? Instead, that's where we should look for it differently, I think. And Jesus never automatically said, well, okay, Matthew, good, you're a tax collector, you're going to be in charge of finances. No, of course not, obviously. So I just thought that was something, as I was reading through and thinking about our next series of Bible studies on the disciples. Judas was in charge of finances, but we really don't know what he did. And yet Matthew was very specifically in charge of finances as his occupation, and was not in charge of purse. I just thought that was an interesting idea that I hadn't clicked on before. So
Nope.
there's a lot of different contrasts or variations between the Gospels, of course, including the one that has Matthew's name on it, which is well accepted as he was the one that wrote it as well. So we have Matthew talks about after the healing of the paralytic and the exorcism. That's the order of those events are a little bit different. Not that the information is still there. The order happens to be different, which I thought was interesting. But what it seems to be is sometimes. So for Matthew, it was more a condensed list of events as opposed to the other gospel writings. He had a different way of writing, I think, and especially during that time period, it was more theatric. They would just kind of write things in a slightly different way, and it wasn't wrong, it was just different. Again, we don't know for sure, but it's pretty much accepted that he wrote it. I'm looking at my other notes here.
Well, one thing I noticed that the book of Matthew doesn't have the word Levi in it.
Correct.
I thought that was
right. And again, it kind of, you wonder where that comes from, but it's really no different than the book of John not having the name John. It's always the disciple that Jesus loved. I mean, the author writes differently about themselves, it seems, which I think again lends itself to more identification, more approaches to identifying who was the writer of each of the Gospels and kind of reinforcing the authorship of each one of them. Let's see.
The disciples were a melting pot of individuals.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They're all different backgrounds, different vocations, different callings, and Christ brought that all together, and that just reflects to me on our current world situation now. In the last 50 or 100 years, it's a world situation where before it really wasn't. It was just the United States, but it's a world situation, and Christ brings the world together.
Well, and even within our smaller communities, we have a diversity, at least within socioeconomic. Again, very similar to the way that Jesus had the disciples set up. And yet we have a tendency, though, to still divide upon those lines, which is really sad that even within
we do.
We still divide people by those lines. Now, I think things have
which I think that's awful that we do that, but that's the way it's been since time began. That doesn't make it right.
Right.
Maybe the more we recognize it and realize it, maybe we're going to at least nip it in the bud a little bit.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that we're really, I think, areas are working. One of the things that I think has really helped is the fact that we also we have started moving away from traditional church clothes. And I think that's one of the things that has certainly helped, because it used to be, you went to church, you dressed to the nines. But I think things have improved. I mean, granted, I still wear a suit and tie when I preach, and when it's Communion Sunday, I wear the collar. But that's really the only time I do that. When I was, before I was officially a pastor, I mean, I wore jeans and a t-shirt to church. And of course, not too many years before, that would have been scandalous. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
we're getting better, I think, as a church. The church, I'm saying,
Right.
this blanket term of church, because for some people that was one of the issues, that, well, I don't have the right clothes, and people within the church would respond saying, no, you don't have the right clothes, don't come in our doors, which is really sad. But
Yeah.
but by the example of Jesus and the disciples saying, we don't care about class, we don't care about where you stand, again, socioeconomically, that's not a problem for us. We don't care. I mean, Jesus literally bucked the system all the way through. I mean, there was at no time that he really went along with religious norm in any way. I mean, he was always moving away from what things or how things should be done. I mean, heck, he even literally changed the day of worship, which granted, we're getting better at that too, where, at no time did Jesus actually say, well, you have to worship on Sunday. The intent is to have a day of worship, whatever day that looks at, it doesn't matter. I know some churches meet Saturday, some meet Sundays, some meet Wednesdays. So, it doesn't matter as long as there's a day of worship. And I think that's really important too, because you have some people that work and they don't have the opportunity to come to church otherwise.
Right. Yeah, that's because our world, there's people that have to work on Sundays.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, lots of people.
Right.
So that's one change. But I was thinking about the dress. Alice, years ago, Joyce and I went to Sunday night services years ago, and it was cold one Sunday night, really cold. And Joyce said, can I wear slacks? And I said, well, there's a lady in the church who was kind of the matriarch. And I said, when she wears slacks, you can wear slacks. That night, she wore slacks. So I had to eat my words and say, yeah, you can wear slacks on Sunday night. And so I can remember, and that happened 40 years ago, I suppose, a long time ago. But that was a thing. You didn't wear
when
slacks.
I was a kid, you wore gloves. You wore
Yes.
white gloves to church. Everybody wore white gloves to church.
Alice, did you wear a bonnet, an Easter bonnet or anything?
Yeah. Little clip on usually, because I was a kid then. But the women had a hat on.
Yeah, and for the ladies or for the little girls, they had the little chin strap underneath there. And us boys would flip those, get a hold of that, flip them, and that was that really made the girls mad, but it was fun.
Now, what I remember was like they call them a headband nowadays, but they were a little wider, and so they didn't have to have the strap under the chin. They clamped to your head. But you made sure that you had one, especially at Easter. Easter Sunday was dress attire.
Yeah, a few years ago, well, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I asked the ladies here in the church to all wear bonnets, and about half of them was able to find a bonnet to wear, and it was I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But you can't even hardly buy them today.
No, I wouldn't know where to go get one.
No. But that's the differences of.
I I'd probably show up at Hobby Lobby and buy something and make it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. But it just, the differences that we have transitioned to, because Matthew had a different set of rules than we in the 17, 18, 1900s had a different set of rules. And now we're changing those rules too about how to dress. So,
Yeah.
Well,
I remember even there in Radnor, many years ago, and I've only been going like 22 or something, so it'd been about 15. We had casual Sunday where
really,
we didn't dress up. Yeah, now it's every Sunday's casual.
right,
almost.
right.
I remember one man says, "Well, can I wear flip flops?" And we all kind of looked at him, but we let him.
Yeah.
But I think that's it's the evolution of the church. I mean, as I've said before, time and time again, the church itself will continually change. The gospel message doesn't
Yes.
and never can, but the way we do church, the way we worship, I mean, those things are always going to change and adapt. That's just the way things are, and yet we still look back to some of the old traditions because they help build us into the position we're at. I mean, it's looking at Matthew himself. I mean, he had 130 times in his gospel that he referenced back to Old Testament prophets.
Okay.
So, I mean, even he was part of the brand new covenant, in essence, by Jesus Christ coming and revamping the whole thing. And yet even he was recording back to the Old Testament and saying, okay, but we need to look at this too. This got us, we're going from point A to point B, but this was before this was at the beginning of A, or this was part of our A. We had to build up our connection and things like that. And so it was interesting also that he has a particular phrase which he used: that which was spoken through the prophets ought to be fulfilled. That phrase is only used in the book of Matthew. So again, he was referencing back to the Old Testament, to the old, prophets, and saying, this is God speaking, and which is really interesting because again, this would have been the ultimate kind of slap in the face to the Pharisees, because that's what they hinged everything on. They were the ones that would always be going back to the Old Testament and trying to point out the flaws in Jesus. And with mass, of course, what Matthew was writing was what Jesus said and things like that. But it was really it was negating all of their arguments against Jesus by Matthew referencing or writing that Jesus referenced back to all these Old Testament prophets. Well, if that's what they say, and the Pharisees would have known if it was wrong. I mean, that would have been their job to know. They had no footing. They had nothing to stand on. If he's using Old Testament prophets, which is what their entire faith base was built on, there was nothing for them to report back on, nothing to fight back with. And I think that was another thing that I found especially interesting about the book of Matthew, is how much, if you look at of course, I'm sure your Bibles do too, all the footnotes, where it references back to Isaiah and Joel and all of these Old Testament prophets, which was really, really interesting. And the other Gospels, of course, did it as well. But it seemed like Matthew was very filled with those references back, more so than maybe some of the other ones.
Now, if we would have, this just hit me. If we would have said that the church shouldn't allow modern things, we need to stay old.
Yeah.
I'll have it. We wouldn't be able to have this connection right now with Zoom.
Oh, absolutely.
If
Absolutely.
we say we couldn't change, we wouldn't have Zoom.
Well, I
Or
mean,
we wouldn't have Facebook Live.
there's a
Right.
lot of different things. If we look at, the original church started out in homes. They were never in their
Right.
own separate building. So we changed that. Then they brought in, eventually brought in pews, which is just crazy, and then horror of horrors, they brought in musical instruments. And then, we have, microphones and speakers, and then we start bringing in, maybe guitars and drums, and then we have things like Facebook Live and Zoom, and so, and I didn't even mention the fact that we actually had English translated Bibles. I mean, all those different things that has changed. And it's, again, the gospel message doesn't change. It's just how we present
Right.
it changes.
That's
For
what I was alluding to.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like every week I do, or Monday through Friday, I do a devotion in the morning. Well, this last Friday, I did a
Right.
devotion, which was music. Well, for me, I mean, that's one of the most intricate, or one of the most vital parts of worship to me is music. I can't play a lick, but I love music, and it really kind of inspires me
Yes.
and moves me forward. And so devotion doesn't have to be, a spoken or written devotion. It can be music. But it's something
Music.
that brings you closer to God.
Except I didn't like your choice of music.
Oh, you didn't like that one?
Did-
No, I cannot stand anybody singing and whining at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll remember that for next time. But
Yeah,
The song was good, but yeah,
I
and it
remember.
seems like all the new singers, if they don't whine, they can't sing.
It depends on them. Yeah, you're right though. But what's interesting is there was a older woman that I had a friend, a pastor friend, share with me. He had two services at his church. One was a traditional service. One was a more contemporary. And the contemporary had the guitars and the drums and stuff like that. And he had this one lady that would come. She was an older lady, and she would bring her grandkids, and they would go to the contemporary. And he was talking to her, and she said, no offense, but I don't like the music at the contemporary. But she said,
right.
my grandkids do, and
Yeah.
that's how I can get them to come. And so,
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
it's just the way you deal with things.
Yeah.
It's funny because there's some bands that are called the screamo, or the heavy metal, even of the Christian bands. And honestly, some of those I can listen to and some I can't. But what I do is I read through the lyrics, and it's not always what it sounds like, but rather what they're saying.
Yeah.
Because
And the gyrations they do sometimes.
well, and see with and that
I don't know,
Go ahead.
like Elvis,
Oh,
people couldn't stand the way he acted, but yet he was a good singer.
yeah. And
Right.
actually,
Exactly.
he never received any awards or anything for his rock music. It was only his gospel music that he got any awards
Yeah.
for.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
And so, but yeah, I mean, if you listen to him play some of his gospel
Oh,
music,
yeah.
it was gorgeous. I mean, the man
Mhm.
could really sing. And
Of
so,
course,
but
that's when I grew up, was when he was,
Right.
his songs were popular. So now I'm dating myself, but
yeah,
you know, I
but
liked his songs. I just didn't like him.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, that's Joyce. My wife didn't like, who was it? Oh, the guy with the long beard and the, uh, just a single guy. And his songs are beautiful. I can't think what his name is, but to watch him, she didn't want to watch him.
and now, are you talking about a Christian singer?
Yes,
David Crowder.
David Crowder. You got it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Joyce could not stand to watch him, but she loved his music.
he
Yeah.
is a phenomenal singer and songwriter. Love
Mhm.
his stuff. Um, but yeah, he's kind of he is what you would label as like a hippie. He looks,
Right,
I mean,
right.
Yeah.
he looks like such a hippie. But
Well,
but
and so would Levi, would Matthew have been that difference, that same type of difference to the traditional disciple?
I
Was
think
he a
so.
contemporary disciple?
No, no. See,
Could have been.
I think he would have been the more traditional. I think he would
You
have been
think
the
so?
clean cut
Yeah.
businessman looking type of guy just because of his position and working with the Romans. I think he would have aimed to be the most. Now, he might have been, fashionably, he might have been, right on the cutting edge, but he would have been the professional looking one. He would have
Okay,
been the
okay.
one people would have looked at as, oh, this is a guy in authority. This is
Interesting.
a guy who's intelligent, one I can talk to, as opposed to, Peter and some of the other guys who are probably spitting and scratching themselves and, thinking nothing of it. Yeah, because
Well,
why
I
wouldn't
always,
that was their lively. That was how they lived. I mean,
Mhm,
it's not a slam on them. It's just who they were.
mhm.
Um,
I always looked at Matthew as being the diplomat,
oh,
because
I think so.
he would have had different kinds of one of them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he would know who to threaten and who to praise and talk to nicely, and so he probably had that attitude too.
He would
And
have been
I think,
something like Paul.
yeah,
What was Paul? What did Paul say? I've become all things to all people,
Right.
yeah, when you're
just
a
to
Roman,
save
you're
a
a
few.
Roman, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly, Alice.
Yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
Oh,
yeah, I
I think
remember that.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we have to remember that Matthew would have had to have bid for his job, and he would have actually
Yes.
been somebody who would have held that position for a while. It seems like, and so
Right.
therefore, oh, absolutely, Alice, he definitely would. I feel have been. You're absolutely right. I think he would have been like the diplomat. He would have been the one who could talk to everybody. He's the one who would you talk about the really good diplomats, the ones who, if they spend a week with a completely different group of people, after a week, you're not going to be able to tell them any different. They're going to act and speak and express themselves exactly like that group because they have to for survival. To be a tax collector for that long, you would have had to have survived. You would have had to have um, some, some pretty smooth talking, to really be in that position. And so, again, that's why I think that Matthew would have been the one who looked the most professional. I just
Mhm.
yeah,
because of his position. In fact, he may have even dressed as Romans, depending on.
Oh, okay.
It's
Hadn't
entirely
thought about
huh?
possible
that.
he did, because that would have been
Yeah.
he was a Roman representative to the Jewish people.
Yes. Yeah. And Jesus wouldn't have said to Levi, Matthew, come follow me, I'll make you fishers of men.
No,
That
no,
wouldn't have resonated with Levi, I don't think. He wasn't a fisherman.
no.
He didn't have that
Right.
background. So, and then what happened to, did Levi leave his tax collecting job?
I think he would have had to.
Well, I do
think
too,
he-
but we
I
don't
think it's
see
the
that.
end.
And so who took that over? Who bid the next higher? And,
Yeah.
it just, things like that.
And again, I think Jesus, of course, he knew the heart of people. So yeah,
Right.
he definitely would not have said, "I'll make you fishers of men," because from Levi's standpoint, that would have been a position below him.
Uh-huh.
He would not have accepted that terminology in any way, shape, or form. He
Right.
would have wanted
Right.
to do that.
Mhm.
And it would have been interesting to hear what Jesus said to Matthew, what he said to
Yeah,
him.
what was his calling?
Right. Because we again, he had his own home. He obviously had enough money
Wealthy.
uh, to provide a full meal to a group of people at a moment's notice, and so he obviously had money. So there had to have been something very significant for Jesus to have said that clicked with Matthew to in essence tell him, "I need to leave this position." Do you have something, Alice?
In Mark 2:14,
Okay.
says it's talking about Jesus. Says as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." So he arose and followed him.
Okay,
So
so
he
that,
just, according to that, he just got up and said, "Okay,
yeah.
forget this. I'm going with him."
Yeah, see,
And
so,
what kind of, how would you think about that if Levi was your employee and he says, I'm out of here?
yeah.
I mean, that just really, that creates a breakdown in the system.
Yeah.
But yet Levi felt strong enough, whatever Christ said to him, he just followed him.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't know what he said.
So you wonder if Matthew already had some knowledge of Jesus at this point.
Had to.
You wonder, oh, had he been hearing about this Jesus guy that was around town? I think you would have had to, and I also am looking at it from the perspective, would it have been common for somebody to give up the tax collecting position? Would it, because you're a pariah, you are an outcast from your people by having that position, and so from one side, to give it up, you may be able to come back into the Jewish fold. But by the same side of things, by giving it up, you are no longer under the protection of the Roman authorities.
Right, right.
So it could very well have been writing your own death notice.
Could have been.
By saying, okay, I'm giving up this position. You don't have protection anymore. People may very well come after you now.
Right.
So you don't really know what he was thinking, what his mindset was,
Right.
and what people thought of him. And I'm sure there was a lot of people that were judging Jesus and the other disciples by welcoming Matthew in.
Well, and what Matthew giving up all that money, What was it? What did Christ tell the one guy? Said, you
Back
gotta,
everything that you have taken. And the
yes.
one guy says, I'll give it back times 4 or something like that. I remember
Something-
exactly the terminology.
Was that Zacchaeus?
Uh,
I
don't
it
remember.
doesn't make any difference,
but
but
the
somebody.
point being that he said, I will give back way more than what I've taken.
Right.
And so did Matthew kind of do the same thing or what?
Yeah, that's what I wonder.
Uh,
Matthew just gave up his livelihood. We
Right.
assume he had a family, a wife and kids, and we don't know, but he gave up a lot to follow Jesus. Now, the fisherman didn't, to me, the fisherman didn't give up as much.
Oh,
Certainly
yeah,
they
I
gave
don't
up,
think so.
well, they gave up some livelihood. I realize that,
Right.
but Matthew gave up a lot of wealth.
Right. And
Monetary wealth.
from a worldly perspective, Matthew gave up
Yes,
more
right.
than the fisherman did. Yes, I would agree. And again, looking at it from the perspective of if he did have a family, he has, in essence, put them in danger as well, because, again, he doesn't have any more Roman protection at this point.
Right, right.
So that means they don't either. Because I can't imagine that he kept that position. I
No.
especially with the travels that he did with Jesus, I can't imagine being a tax collector in a position where you had to be collecting taxes in your area and still be able to travel like he did with Jesus and the rest of the disciples.
Yeah. Now, do you suppose Matthew's office, because it said, didn't you say, Alice, it said office some market?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, I've already turned the page. Yes.
Was close to the water so
Let's
that he
see.
could, I don't know. It just seems like to me, it wouldn't have been in the center of town. It would have been close to the water. I don't know why.
It says, once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Ophelia,
Right.
sitting at
What
the tax
Alice,
collector's
yeah.
booth. Yeah. So,
Yeah, so-
it would have been, and it would have been probably on the edge of Copernicus, is kind of more on the outskirts of it, which kind of makes sense if you are looking at it from the perspective of he's taxing the fishermen as they're bringing in their stock,
Their catch.
their catch. But yeah, that would have been pretty common. It seems that, at least that's what I've been reading. It was situated on the border between territories of Philip and Herod, It is likely at this booth that Jesus called on Matthew to follow him. So it went right on the borders, right on the edge of town, and it would have been right about there. So potentially even catching people as they were coming across the border.
Right, right. Yeah. So
Coming into town, coming across the border, and he would have been catching people when he could.
Yep. Yep.
So, well, any other thoughts? Well, if not, and again, we don't know how Matthew even died for sure. It's widely accepted that he was martyred, but
Right.
other than that, that's pretty much all we have about any of the disciples.
Right.
Because depending on which account you read, there's really none of the disciples that we know exactly how they died.
Right.
There's legends and myths about each one of them, but other than John, history says that all of them died a martyr's death. So
Right.
there you go.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Well, so next week we'll talk about Thomas, which again is kind of a fun one. It's an interesting one, who actually gets more acknowledgement after Jesus's death than he does beforehand.
Oh,
Mhm.
He's really the only one that really seems to have it's like, oh yeah, we get a couple of mentions of him as part of the group, but then all of a sudden, boom, we have this big story about him. And where the term doubting Thomas comes from is
Right.
from him, which kind of stinks, but it's better than being colored like Judas is. So,
Yeah,
hey, there you
right.
go. All right, I think that let me pray and then
Yes.
let's go out. Lord God, thank you again so much for allowing us to gather together to study your word, to be in fellowship, to just discuss how we can break uh, kind of the Bible apart and bring those parts together in new and unique ways that open it up even more to us. We thank you, Lord God, for everything that we have. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
I'll see y'all sometime.
Good evening.
All right. Bye
Good
bye.
evening. Bye.